I come from a professional background in the sense that I started my career as a broadcast engineer, moved to documentary filmmaking and journalism and column writing, and finally as a newsmaker representing the royal family. So what I present here is not from the ivory tower of the academic world, but rather a blend of what I have been through and what I see now as an academician. How can we engage the profound philosophy of middle path in journalism? So the evolution of the Buddhist media has been more in terms of giving it a development journalism approach. However, in the post 2008, that's the year that Bhutan adopted democratic elections and parliamentary form of government with the king as the head of state and an elected prime minister looking after the governance. We see lots of new models being introduced in the country. The fourth estate model, the anti-establishment model, and basically what I am saying is that the current media is bit model-less and bit directionless, and that's the genesis of the middle path journalism and the mindfulness communication, which the media fraternity met in Paro, and we discussed a new way forward or a search for a new way. The problem is further augmented by the social media that has completely taken over the traditional media. That's happening not just in Bhutan but across the globe. And we see the rise of the social media together with decline in trust in institutions. So that with institutions, I also include the institution of the media. So where do we move? Now, if we go back to the principle of the media, is that it shapes the public opinion, and whatever public opinion that we can that are shaped is that we need to look at the societal values. So the value becomes one of our pillars of the discussion on middle path journalism. The second proposition that I have is that media, as a public institution in every country, should facilitate towards working towards a vision of a country, not being being anti government at all time, or being as we had listened earlier, confrontational. Something I think even in the if you look at the four normative theory of the press, there is also the facilitative and the collaborative roles, which actually the media has actually forgotten. So only the critical and the radical role is being exercised, but the facilitative and the role of the media is actually forgotten. The development philosophy of Bhutan has been the gross national happiness, which was enunciated by the former king in the early 70s, where he emphasized happiness over gross domestic product or gross national product. You remember that was the measurement before the GDP. And we all know that media is a means towards democracy, and democracy is a means towards the greater well-being of a nation. So my proposition is that media is a means towards a means to a greater goal. So which means that it ultimately implies that media should work towards the greater goal and not against it or in any confrontational manner. Few words on happiness, which is the most misunderstood word right now. There is overemphasis of happiness with Bhutan. Wherever I go, they ask me whether Bhutan is the happiest land. It isn't. We have our own problems and issues. We are a normal country with all the normal problems. Um, the genesis of gross national happiness actually has more inclination towards the concept of contentment. Happiness is transitory, it is very subjective, whereas contentment is more profound. So when we talk about the philosophy of gross national happiness, we are talking more about contentment. A person need not necessarily be happy, but he or she can be content, especially depending on the Buddhist concept of impermanence and karmic consequences. So an old lady who is poor, widowed, may not be happy, but could be content, accepting the fact that this is just my karma. So that's the genesis of gross national happiness. If we look at even the national anthem of Bhutan, we don't talk about happiness, but rather we talk about peace and prosperity. So it's Bandi Kinima Sharvashok, which means that may the sun of peace and contentment shine on the people, but not really that the happiness uh, uh, be shining on the people of Bhutan. The second, the second pillar of my proposition is the values, the societal values, the social values that we are grown up with, the socialization process that we have. I think that one of the role of the media is to propagate that and pass it to the next generation. In fact, one of the definitions given on the gross national happiness (GNH) by the current king is that it is a development with values. And if we look at what are the values in the Buddhist society, we have Mang, which is community, Thadamsi, which is a sacred commitment between you and the others. Um, then we have Nyingje, which is compassion. And lastly, Lejude, which is the karmic cause and effect. So these are the values with which we grow up, and which binds Bhutan as a society. So media as a public institution must must take these values towards the next generation, just as we received from our parents. Briefly on the middle way philosophy. It is not a midpoint. It's not a mediocrity. It's not a middle way. It's not a midpoint between two extremes. It is choosing the right way. So the middle path journalism that I propose, first of all, should promote contentment. And I feel we need to promote contentment, especially if we are proposing a sustainable development. There is so much of discontentment, there is so much of greed. I mean, I don't want to elaborate on this, but if the media as a public institution can promote a little bit of contentment, perhaps we can achieve some level of sustainable development. The second pillar is promoting community. Our media and communication theories come from the West, where individualism is promoted, whereas here we in Asia, we are more a collectivist society. And the third is, again, when we talk about commitment, when we talk about community, we're not saying that that media persons should not bring out cases of corruptions or injustice. That is covered in the third pillar, where as a media person, you have a sacred commitment to the vocation, to the people that you serve, to the institutions that you report. That comes under Thadamse. Last, compassion. This is one of the pillars that I find it very interesting, especially in a country like Bhutan that has three different worldviews: the worldviews of my father, my worldview, Western educated, and the worldviews of my children. When we look at events, we don't compress everything into what is happening now. So in Buddhism, time has to be expanded little to the past and little to the future. So the time is elastic, okay, which means that there is no need for There is no need for the victim to be over glorified. There is no need for the perpetrator to be over vilified. I think everyone deserves some level of compassion, some level of feeling, some level of acceptance. Middle path philosophy is a very profound. I dare not make any definition, but let me say what middle path journalism is and what is this not. It's not another set of code for journalists. It's not a parallel or an alternative form of journalism. It is just another way another way of doing journalism that our media persons could perhaps adopt. There have been a lot of similar movements. For example, peace journalism in countries after the conflict, restorative journalism that has come out from Colombia. So this is another alternative or a way to do journalism in our society here in Asia. So what I define, this is the working definition, is that middle path journalism is a media model that takes into account the social cultural values and the nation's vision. And that is a working definition that I have given. So it's not only in doing journalism, but it also in consuming media content. As we have more and more social media, and where user generated contents are almost a normal now, I think there has to be not only middle path journalism among the traditional media, but also among the users and among people in the society.